because I didn't understand how trauma works. And we ended up working with 13 Spanish-speaking countries, and we were able to lower child trafficking by 49%. So it was a very sort of quiet entrance into the world of anti-trafficking. And I was able to start behind the scenes doing what I love, playing with numbers, right, and data. And then I realized, okay, I can do this, and started working in Survivor.
I'm really interested. It'll sound counterintuitive to a lot of leaders out there who maybe haven't come across this kind of concept to surrender and let go when they've been used to being in control and being successful in that. So one of the ways that we can do that is to really try and work on how present we are in those moments where we have to adapt and be agile. How do you try and make sure that you're as present as you can be moment to moment?
Well, Andrew, in my world, things unfold quickly and in real time, right? So literally while we are on this phone call, there is a rescue happening.
Hello, and welcome to Confessions of a Successful Leader, hosted by me, Andrew Tallents, the self-coaching expert. In each episode of the show, we hear the insightful confessions of a successful leader who wants to inspire others to live their professional and personal dreams. I am always keen to hear your feedback, particularly in relation to the kinds of leaders you would like me to invite onto the show in future. But for now, sit back, relax, and enjoy the rich insights from our special guest.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Confessions of a Successful Leader, hosted by me, Andrew Tallents, the self-coaching expert. I'm delighted to say that Sam Wijeyakumar has actually joined me in the studio today. Sam, welcome.
Hello, Andrew. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, we're looking forward to hearing your story today. We always get to know our guests before we go into the story. So if you'd like to just tell the audience a little bit about who you are and where your focus is right now.
Sure. So I work in the interesting space of anti-human trafficking alongside technology and trafficking. So it's an interesting space in which we try to fight human trafficking using technology.
Super. And I like to get to know a little bit about, obviously that's a very, very important part of you as a person. When you're not working in that space, what is it you do to relax and actually recharge the batteries?
Love to travel, so try to do that as much as I can. But I'm also very much a bookworm, Andrew. So my idea of a good time is a good book and a cozy corner, right?
And are you a Kindle prefer or books?
I am okay with any of the above, including Audible, if all of this works for me. So it doesn't have to be a physical book, but I do love my Kindle as much as a book. But for me, it's about the reading.
Excellent. And bear in mind, this audience that's listening to this now and watching this, just from recent weeks or months, what's one book recommendation you'd make to our audience?
I actually read a really interesting book a couple weeks ago called The World is for Sale. And it's all about, our economy and petroleum and how the industry has dominated. So very, very interesting book. I'd recommend it. Some pretty interesting leadership tips in there too for how they got to where they were going, and definitively some what not to do as well. So yeah.
Super, and that's a great segue into our topic today. So we're really looking forward to hearing about your personal journey. Take us back to as far as you want to in terms of those early life experiences for you that shaped you in your early leadership style.
Yeah, so, I was a very introverted kid who loved, even back then, to read, right? So my idea of a good time on a Sunday was, and this should date me just about right, Rick D's Top 40. Who else listened to that, right?
Yeah.
Alongside of knitting and crocheting clothes for my dolls and teddy bears and all the rest of it. Like, this was my idea of a good time. Which obviously didn't make me the most social person. And I've learned over the years to be social, but still very much more comfortable puppeteering from behind, right? So love that. But as a result of which I was bullied all the time. So, and in the end, that led to me trying to commit suicide, which I failed at. And at the time, my mindset was that, well, good God, I can't even kill myself, right? I really just need to stop, bringing shame on my family. And I became one of the statistics. I ran away from home, and within 48 hours of leaving, I ended up working in a brothel, and unfortunately, I didn't know that. I thought it was a nightclub. So at the end of the first night, they said, "Come upstairs. There's something wrong with the take on the till," and it was all done after that. And I ended up trafficked. I was labor trafficked once and sex trafficked 3 times in a 4-year period, and that shaped a lot of what I did, for good and for bad, right? So obviously it was a shockingly terrible experience, and not one I would certainly wish anyone else to have to deal with. That said, I learned a lot about people through it, right? And how to read them, and survival techniques that I certainly found very, very useful all through my life. So while there was, certainly the bad outweighed the good in that period, there are certainly things that I can take from it that have helped me on my career journey. And when I came out, I most definitely did not want to have absolutely anything to do with human trafficking, and went off into the world of business intelligence, because you can do a lot of that from behind the scenes, right? Predictive data analysis and all sorts of fun things. But turned out that I was particularly good at helping people adapt and implement software, especially people who were not akin to being in the technology field, to be able to simplify the information and provide them with the ability to transform in that way. And that led me on a path down a software career that I didn't know I was going to sort of do. But it really provided for me a place to sort of work with some amazing leaders and some fantastic companies, but also to put different skills in place and learn, how to be less of a sort of antisocial being, and sort of learned people skills and soft skills and things that were definitely lacking, since, I still, if I'm telling the truth, love a good book on the beach, right? Like that's my idea of a nice holiday. So.
Me too. And just if we can, I really appreciate you telling that story. And there are many people listening to this and watching this will have their own version of what's happened to them in the past, which taught them those survival techniques that you mentioned, which are great in terms of protecting us from, harm in the future. But also, you say, it sometimes shuts us off from things. So can you be a bit more explicit about when you were moving into business, what kind of survival techniques were coming through in terms of that kind of environment where you were having to obviously deliver things and achieve things? How were they helping you?
Yeah. Ever read any Jim Collins? So,
Yeah.
he's excellent with his, From Good to Great and all
Yeah.
sorts of excellent books that he's written. But he talks about that sort of fanatical paranoia, right? And I think for me, that running what if scenarios was something that was very much a part of what I had come out of, right? So every day, if you work in human trafficking, you're running what if scenarios. What if the person does this? What if the trafficker does that? What are we going to do here? And you're always thinking about that safety piece, right? Risk mitigation. And I think when I first started, risk mitigation was the thing I started from, right? But the thing is, and the idea of sort of starting small and growing and sort of testing things out was a big piece of, how I wanted to do things. And when we started Rahab's Daughters, which is 10 years ago now, I think I just wanted to put my toe in the water and see, right? So it was a start small, very risk averse, very, and I learned that you have to balance risk, right? So it's fine to have 1,000 what if scenarios going on, but then you've got to rank them in a way that you can decide how bad really is the risk. And I'm not saying pull out the actuarial tables and do the data analysis, though as a data girl, I'd be quite happy to do that. But I'm saying you've got to practically think through, and this is where having teams with differing opinions and voices of dissension is really important, because if you're overly cautious, having people around you who can be devil's advocate to that, or if you're, run by the seat of your pants and nobody's sort of, reining in the seat of your pants flight, then all of these things have equal issues, right? And so I think one of the things for me was I had to learn how to take risks, calculated risks, right? And I want all the data, but you can't have all the data in the industry that we work in. That's not a possibility. So, probability is an important piece of the puzzle. And sort of having the creative and the facts come together with experience allows for the ability to move forward with, cautiously optimistic types of decision making, right? But the one thing I learned was that I've got to have people around me who are willing to be the voice of dissension and who are willing to question what's going on so that you can have those discussions. And for me, that was a very important lesson to learn, that, it can't happen on an island.
And you've been saying as well that you've been focusing in more recent years on those sort of softer skills and the building relationships. Just go back again to when you were coming into the business world and having that kind of survival mode. Talk particularly to me about trust, about trusting others, but also asking for support and help, because I think from what other guests have said in the past, there are two things that are very interesting to explore as we try and learn those softer sides.
I used to have the attitude that it was faster and easier to do it myself than to try to train other people or to explain to other people how to get it done. I am living proof that if you do that, you will hit walls and you will stunt your own growth, right? Of your business, of yourself, and of the people around you. So it is really important to ask for help. And there's no one person who can know everything, right? There are lots of things that I have good skill sets in, and there are lots and lots more that I have no skill sets in, right? And I've come to the conclusion that the more I know, the less I know. So having those people around, first of all, if you don't know what your blind spots are, trust me, ask your spouse. They'll be very happy to tell you right away. And if not, ask one of your best friends. They know. Your parents probably see them too. Now, once you know what they are, then mitigating for them is super important, right? And so having people who can deal with those areas that you're not good at. And for me, learning that I didn't have to be perfect at everything was a very important piece of the puzzle, right? So sometimes done is better than good. Not all the time, but sometimes done is better than good, right? And so, some of the things as I came into leadership, I also had to learn that, it can't be my way or the highway. Sometimes it has to be, decision by committee and bring people forward and change manage through it. And that took me a while as well, right? So in the very beginning, as a young leader, I was like, well, what do you mean they don't want to do it my way? My way's the best. Well, maybe Sam, but not always, right? And just, getting to that point where you're like, okay, team, this is what I think. What do you think? And sometimes when I have teams who aren't super vocal, or who have come out of a culture, being that we're global teams, that maybe has a hierarchical sort of idea of power, right? And so they don't want to give their ideas as much. I like to do a decision brief ahead of time. So I have everybody come to the meeting not knowing what anyone else's decision is, but having written a decision brief for the problem we're trying to solve ahead of time. And then everybody gets to read each other's, so that there's a fair starting point, because everybody has given their opinion without any sort of prior knowledge of anyone else's. And I find that some of these things have really helped to give everyone a voice, because I remember being that person in the room and being too sort of, afraid isn't really the right word, but like having the lack of assertiveness to speak up in the room, right? And so just sort of having experienced that, to then want to lead differently meant that, putting in processes like decision briefs allows me to give everybody an equal voice, right? Which I think is really important in the room.
I agree. And for those that are listening again, and just listening to your comments about asking your partner or a friend, there's a great little survey that you can do, which if you go to positiveintelligence.com, it's Shirzad Shamin's work around saboteurs.
Yeah.
And again, it's a lovely way of you looking at that sort of blind spot and just seeing what are the triggers potentially that you're not aware of, particularly when we're feeling negative.
Mm-hmm.
When we're feeling positive, these can be our superpowers, these things that show up, but certainly in that. So with that in mind, even now, in terms of the maturity that you have in terms of leadership, what are the things that you still have to watch out for personally in terms of how you might self-sabotage?
Yeah. I mean, I have a restless spirit. That would be the very top of my saboteurs, Andrew. So I have to not put too many new things on the table all at once, right? I want to change everything all the time right now. These are things I have to really think about, because change fatigue is a real thing in businesses. And if we try to push too much change through, that happens. My second one is hyperachievement, and my third one is controller, right? So for me, I got to watch my hyperachievement, because I don't want to fall back into the trap of putting my self-worth in my achievements, right? Because that doesn't make me who I am. And sometimes we forget that. So that's something, and I don't want a culture of people who think they have to hyperachieve in order to feel like they're getting the approval that they're looking for. And I think of my three saboteurs, I think the third one is my hardest to manage, because I want to control everything. Having been out of control for so long and had control taken away from me for so long, I want to control everything around me, right? Because it gives me a nice safety blanket. And I'm not gonna lie, God every day reminds me that He is in control and I am not, right? And I often have to remind myself of that as well. There's actually a song I play to myself every day that literally says, "I am God and you are not," right? And it is an important piece of the puzzle, because when things go awry, let's be fair, when you run a business, things go awry. When you run a business that helps rescue and rehabilitate victims of human trafficking, the number of things that goes awry in one day can't be counted on two hands, right? So learning that controlled environments are fine for certain things. So I control the environment I live in. I control the environment that is my bathroom or is my kitchen or whatever. And that's all fine. But when it comes to controlling of things that you literally can't control, all that you can do is plan and have your what if scenarios run, so that you've created sort of strategy plans to mitigate the risk. But trust me when I tell you, you cannot plan for the type, like all of a sudden something new will come along, right? And it will be something you've never experienced before. And you're like, wait, where did that come from? And then you'll write it into the manual later, right? For how to deal with it. But in that moment, I think people need to learn surrender, right? And just to be able to let things unfold and have a processes for how you're going to manage the unfolding. So I am all about the project management software, right? It gives me a sense of peace and safety that I can see greens and reds and oranges, and that everything has a sprint board, and we're managing things, and that makes me feel lovely. It helps my staff and our survivors, because their dream plans and everything are put in that way. And so it's controlled chaos, if that makes sense. So there's method to the madness, in that there's a processes which makes all the controlling folks in our organization feel happy. But then there's also the ability to adapt instantly to the environment as it's changing, because what's the great thing about sprint boards and project management boards? You can change them, right? And you've done the what if scenarios enough that they'll automatically calculate out the changes and whatnot. So I think once you understand your saboteurs, planning for them so that they're not as much of a problem, and then obviously working on your PQs and trying to get your sage out is always an important piece of the puzzle, right? And I think knowing where you're going to fall down makes it easier to plan for it.
I agree, and I'm so pleased you've described that. People can actually go and look at the model, but I work with a lot of leaders, CEOs, founders, and actually those three that you've mentioned are very common amongst leaders because of what's happened to them in the past and those survival mechanisms. So I'm really interested. It'll sound counterintuitive to a lot of leaders out there who maybe haven't come across this kind of concept to surrender and let go when they've been used to being in control and being successful in that. So one of the ways that we can do that is to really try and work on how present we are in those moments where we have to adapt and be agile. How do you try and make sure that you're as present as you can be moment to moment?
Well, Andrew, in my world, things unfold quickly and in real time, right? So, literally, while we are on this phone call, there is a rescue happening. And so, quietly in the corner of my screen, I can see things changing. And in my world, because things unfold really quickly and they change, and you have to make decisions on the information you have in that moment, but 3 moments later, the information could change again, right? And so the ability to adapt and have the, non-rigidity, I don't know what the opposite of rigidity is, but like the ability to not be rigid in what, and to be sort of super flexible in the ability to pivot, I think are really, really important. And I think the more resilience that people can build into themselves in order to adapt quickly to the changing environment, the better it is for leaders. Because I find that ones who need ultra amounts of structure, which I used to be that kind of leader who needed hierarchy and structure, and then I realized I can't run an organization that's based on chaos in this like completely rigid walled structure. I mean, I had more manuals than you can imagine, but people couldn't, we have to throw the manual out the window every other day because so much changes. And so teaching our leaders resilience and the ability to pivot have been key things that we have done in order to help our teams to grow and manage change. And certainly it was a hard learned lesson for me as well.
Thank you. I want to go on to, what is it you're in service of now in a few moments, but I'm still fascinated, and you did refer to it earlier, that when you obviously first entered your professional world, the last thing you thought about was being involved in servicing, trafficking and being able to help people and survivors. So what was the pivot point? What was the catalyst for you to start being interested and moving into that?
So I worked for a business intelligence company, and two of our clients, Foundation, so Accenture and Telefonica at the time, wanted to come together and create a analytic model for stopping child trafficking. And my boss, who had no idea of my history, said, "Sam, I think you're the perfect person to do this." And I went, "You must be out of your mind, man. I do not want to do this." And he said, "No, we don't have any other Spanish speakers. You're located in Spain. You're also the head of the region. You're the right person to do this." And I'm like going, there's nothing I would like to do less than this right now. Anyway, the gentleman from Accenture took me out in the field and he's like, "I just want you to come out and see what's going on, right?" And it was horrific. They were flying teenage girls across from South American Spanish-speaking countries into Spain. And instead of silicone breast implants, they were implanting bags of heroin. And then they would just give them double mastectomies and send them on their way. And these were 13, 15, 17-year-old children. And I just am not that heartless, right? Like I saw that and was like, all right, I think I can find the ability to work on this. And we ended up working with 13 Spanish-speaking countries, and we were able to lower child trafficking by 49%. So it was a very sort of quiet entrance into the world of anti-trafficking. And I was able to start behind the scenes doing what I love, playing with numbers, right? And data. And then I realized, okay, I can do this, and started working in survivor-based things. And then we moved back to the States, and I was stunned, right? We landed in Illinois, and there were 16 beds and approximately 16,000 victims within a 60-mile radius of O'Hare. And we started volunteering, my husband and I, at all different organizations, and just couldn't understand why organizations wanted to put the girls they were rescuing basically in jail, right? Like into safe homes, but they were so much like jails that I just couldn't deal. And I'm like, this is not how we should do this. This is not how we should do this. And so we decided to just start taking girls into our home. And I'm not going to lie, I do not recommend this. Do as I say, not as I did, because this is a terrible idea. I'm just putting that out there to everyone. I have a degree in psychology. It wasn't like I was, ill-equipped to start here. And my husband is a PhD in human services. So it's not like we were ill-equipped for what we were trying to start doing, but we were ill-equipped because we didn't understand how trauma works, right? And when you have compressed PTSD and complex PTSD, it takes more than just a safe place, right? And so we had to pivot our leadership skills quite a lot.
No, thank you for that. And I'm not sure if this is relevant for the discussion, say if it isn't, but I read Gabor Mate's work, The Myth of Normal. I think it was last year. And he talks about intergenerational trauma. So, of course, we can have trauma that comes from our earlier lives, but if there's intergenerational trauma as well, that's already there within us, if you like, it's that myth of normal. It's the case we all have trauma to process and deal with. I don't know what your thoughts are on that and from your experience, what you've seen.
Oh, so 83% of children who are born into families where human trafficking occurs, whether it's labor or sex trafficking, will be trafficked. And it won't be considered abnormal because it is the normal for their world. And if you look at the US, this is prevalent. If you look at Thailand, this is prevalent. Like, it doesn't matter where in the world this is happening. And if they are born into those situations, that is what they do, right? And so, and they start earlier and earlier. So that's one of the biggest challenges, and I firmly agree that intergenerational trauma comes down. Also, if you look at kids who come from families where a lot of violence has occurred, whether that was domestic violence or human trafficking or other kind, they witnessed murder or something else happen in the home, rape, etc. There are very real traumatic pieces that are brought down from generation to generation, right? And if you look at the root cause of a lot of the perpetrators as well, so why do traffickers traffic? Why do, domestic violence sort of people commit those crimes? And a lot of it has to do with what they grew up with at home, what happened, what they saw, what they experienced, and how they choose to process it. And so, no, I completely agree with his analysis.
Thank you. And that moves us on to what it is that you'll be in service of now. Obviously, you've got many years ahead of you in terms of what it is that you can do on this planet. So just explain to the audience what it is you're going to be doing for the next 5 or 10 years to make a difference.
Yeah. So I run a nonprofit called Rahab's Daughters, and we are here to rescue, rehabilitate, and reintegrate human trafficking victims, and that's about half of what we do. The other half of what we do is to pinpoint where trafficking is happening and provide reports around that to law enforcement and other agencies that need to know, and then provide education and prevention services, because at the end of the day, prevention is far better than cure. And so if we can prevent it from happening, that's our first order of business wherever possible. So working with at-risk kids, working with at-risk adults is super important. And you'd be surprised, right? The average age of entry into human trafficking is between 8 and 15, depending on where in the world you are when it happens. And in the US, it's widely debated, but seems to be around 11 to 13. So this is very young. And then our second batch is vulnerable women. So women who have been going through divorce, going through financial hardship, or domestic abuse tend to be much more vulnerable. And so these two categories are very big for us. And so we, also trying to train up leaders, especially survivors who've come through and graduated the program, to help lead future programs, because I do think that perspective is very important to be a part of the programmatic structure of things.
What is it that you need as an organization and you personally in terms of the next 5 years to make an even bigger impact in terms of what you're doing? You've only got so many resources, you can try to make the difference. What is it that would make a big difference?
Make a big difference if people would become ambassadors to this topic and talk about it much, much more, because awareness is critical, and there just isn't isn't enough of it. People do not understand that, human trafficking is not the pimp sitting on the corner managing his girls. Today, human trafficking is happening in hotels, in construction industries, in manufacturing, in mining, and just understanding where it's happening in your community and how to spot it, and to be aware of it is huge, right? And so that would be the first thing. And obviously, being a nonprofit, we always need volunteers and donations. So those would be our top 3 asks.
Super, thank you. And I've got one other question to ask you before we give any details for people to contact you. So, and it's an interesting question that's just come to mind now, but for anybody that has been through an experience which they can relate to from what you've said today, and they're just about to restart their lives as you did, what advice comes to mind for you, or something that you can maybe say to them about what they maybe could learn from your journey or others to just give them the best chance possible?
Yeah, so get some external help. Do not repress it. Do not power through it. Get some help to process it. Because if you don't, when your next major stressor arrives, whether that's your first child, your wedding, your whatever it is, it will come back. And all you've done is push the dragon down. He's sitting about here. He will be back out if you don't deal with it. And I would say that is the best advice I can give to people, because a lot of us think, and I was one of the people who was like, I'm just going to power through it. But then we get to a triggering situation and we don't know how to cope. So I would say that, make sure you've sought out the help to have the coping mechanisms so you can make the impact you want to.
Thank you. And if people have been moved out there or want to find out more about your organization or want to get in contact with you, Sam, how should they do that?
www.rahabsdaughters.org.
Excellent. Well, I really appreciate you coming on the show. Thanks for being so vulnerable. I've been fascinated by your journey, and also, just what you're doing right now and making the impact you do. So I really appreciate you taking the time to join us today, Sam.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Confessions of a Successful Leader. You can access all previous episodes of the show at confessionsofaSuccessfulLeader.com. If you are interested in finding out more about conscious leadership and self-coaching, just type in Andrew Tallents into LinkedIn or your favorite browser, and you'll find my contact details and all the content that you need. Until next time, don't forget to stay present, curious, and above all, conscious.